Sempra Energy, Equality California is able to help the LGBTQ community respond to the COVID-19 crisis. So if you haven't already done so, I suggest you look at our website. Equality California has created a new website, COVID19@eqca.org. And there you'll find links to a wide range of services that are being provided at the federal level, at the state level, and at the county level. It's a tremendous amount of work, and so I think you'll really get a lot of resources there. We've also established a telephone helpline so people can call up and ask questions about their personal circumstances and actually get a personal callback phone call from someone on our staff. And also Equality California is doing a number of these webinars. We really want to help LGBTQ people navigate these seriously challenging times. Today's obviously our first webinar in the series. It's called Retooling Your Resume. I've got a couple of amazing guest experts today. And so we would like to talk mostly about employment issues. This is obviously a critical area of discussion, given that somewhere between 30 and 40 million people have recently lost their jobs, been furloughed, they've lost income from side gigs and other income generating opportunities, and now they're finding themselves in a tough situation. So presenting yourself with a retooled resume, especially one that syncs with online application portals and LinkedIn and Glassdoor and some of these other job search tools, is the best way to make yourself stand out to potential employers. So today we're joined by two experts, Drían Juarez, she's the Vice President of Programming at TransCanWork, and Heather Tinsley-Fix, she's the Senior Advisor on Employment Engagement at AARP. For those of you who know, AARP is an organization helping older people, 38 million people, of whom 900,000 are self-identified as LGBTQ. So we're really, really glad to have these two amazing speakers join us today. Drían and Heather have both prepared some slides that'll help you best present yourself with a resume that demonstrates your work experience and your job skills and your credentials. So all of our webinars will be recorded and they'll remain accessible for the future. I'll be putting links to some of our resources in the Q&A box on the Zoom platform. And if you have any questions for our panelists, please put them there. You'll find them at the bottom of the screen. After today's webinar, Equality California will be sending out links to Drían and Heather's presentations and resources that we hope that you will find really helpful. So with that, Drían, maybe we could turn to you. I know that you're going to be sharing your screen and giving us some advice on how to retool your resume. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Valerie, for hosting this, and thank you to EQCA for also hosting this. I'm really excited. I'm really excited to see Heather's presentation. She has tons of great information, so really, really happy that you're doing this. All right, let's jump into it then. I'm going to share my screen right now. Let's share, and let's present here. All right, are y'all able to see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect, okay, so let's start. So my name is Drían Juarez, and I am the Vice President of Programs at TransCanWork. I use female pronouns and gender-neutral pronouns. TransCanWork was founded in 2016, and in a very short amount of time, we have grown to become the nation's largest trans and gender nonconforming employment, training, and consulting services program. Our mission at TransCanWork is to build a national culture where transgender and gender nonconforming people can thrive in the workplace. Today, we have 15 minutes, so I'm going to go through a lot of this information fairly quickly, but you'll have my contact info at the end of this if you have any questions or need any further resources. I'm really going to talk to you about some considerations when designing your resume, what to think about, listing your pre and post transition skills and experience, when to use your legal name versus your preferred name, pre and post transition references and how to address those, and also where to post your resume. So when I start this conversation, I really like to center it in what you love to do. I think the question that you should ask yourself when starting the path of finding your career, finding a new job is, when you love what you do, the universe rewards you for it. So what do you love to do? So think about, what are your life experiences? What are the skills that you've gained through your life experience that people will pay you to do? What are the opportunities around you that will lead you to a career that is rewarding for you and that you will love? So one quick little exercise you can do to do that assessment is you can make a list of all of the things that you enjoy doing or that you do well, and then tease out all of the skills that you've gained when doing the things that you love. An example would be you enjoy writing, you're a good writer. Consider a career as a writer. There are screenwriters, television writers, even script doctors. There might be positions out there that you're not even aware of. So really center this journey on what you love to do. So let's talk about design. When designing your resume, don't go overboard with intricately decorated templates. Look for sufficient white space, margins of at least 0.7 inches, and a font size that is no smaller than 11 points. That will make it really hard for the recruiter or hiring manager to see what you've written in your resume. So here's an example of what we feel is a good resume. You can see here there's a lot of white space, so the eye can travel throughout the different components of the resume easily. Very quickly, you're able to identify who this is, how to get a hold of them, and what are the skills that they want to highlight. So it very quickly gives you all of the information that that you want the hiring manager or recruiter to see. So the considerations for trans people is you should know that your resume is not a legal document, so you can use your preferred name on your resume. Some people prefer to list their initial followed by their preferred name. So for example, F. Maria Jackson. Or you can identify your preferred name in quotes, Frank Maria Jackson. Now, what's really important before you do this and deciding whether to put your preferred name is doing research. You want to find out how inclusive that company is. If they're very inclusive and promote themselves as an inclusive employer, then you might want to list your preferred name. Because when you're having that interview, you may get a question about why is Maria in quotations. If you should get a question like that, the best thing is to keep it short and sweet. Don't overshare and don't get into the weeds of what that means. All you can say is, Maria is my preferred name and I wanted to share my preferred name with you, period. That's it, short and sweet. Number two, make sure that you are reachable. So make it easier for the recruiter to reach out to you by providing your contact info near the header. So again, that example that we looked at the very top, there's the phone number, the email address. People's addresses are becoming a little bit more antiquated, so you don't necessarily need to put your address, but you should consider putting in your LinkedIn account. Most professionals now will be looking for you on LinkedIn. So make sure you add that if you don't already. Also consider for trans people, your resume is your first impression on an employer. Using your preferred name helps your employer see you the way you want to be seen. This is especially true if you are early in transition, genderqueer, or not passing in the gender that you identify with. So number three, you want to show off your skills. Don't make recruiters hunt for the most critical information on your resume. Include a table of your key soft and hard skills set up top. Make sure your highlighted skills show why you're a good fit for the job. All the better if these are key words from the job description. So one of the best tips is look at that job description and turn that job description into your resume. Use the key phrases, terms, use that to describe what you've done in the past for past employers. The considerations for trans and GNC people include jobs that you've held under different names, so pre-transition. By doing this, you are not giving the employer permission to contact your former employer. If your former employer is transphobic or knows you by a different name and or gender, don't give the employer permission to contact them. Once you are offered the job, you can explain the situation or not. It may not even be necessary to explain that situation. But if you have an inclusive employer, then maybe you can talk about those things. So list your experience. This section should include each company you've worked for, your title, the dates you worked there, and several bullets that describe your key accomplishments and responsibilities. Now, if we look at the example that we were talking about, under each of the work experience, you have a minimum of 3 bullet points. That's really the most. You don't want to put more than 3 bullet points for each experience. It can start getting wordy and making your resume look busy. So 3 is kind of the max. The considerations for trans people: asking an employer not to contact your past employer could raise a red flag if you don't give them an explanation. If your new employer is trans friendly, then you can talk about the situation. If the new employer that you're applying for, you're not sure how inclusive they are, or they're not trans friendly, then you can provide contact info for someone other than your supervisor, a friendly coworker who can confirm that you work there and who can talk a little bit about the work that you did there. And when possible, you want to quantify your experience. Whenever you can, use concrete data point. It helps provide recruiters with the scope and context of your work and demonstrates how you contributed to the bottom line. That's ultimately what the employer is looking for. And include other positions. Don't be afraid to include positions that aren't directly related to the one that you're applying for, especially if you have limited work experience. You can still use it to demonstrate the skills and qualities that you want to highlight. Some qualities are universal. Time management skills, being able to work in a team, being able to work independently, being able to meet deadlines. Those are skills that you can tease out from experiences that you've had before that maybe don't directly relate to the job that you're applying for, but those are universal skills that you can highlight. If you look at this example, let's see how they quantified their information. Collaborated with a team of 4 people to brainstorm 3 major creative campaigns, which ultimately drove 100,000 plus website visits and a 27% year-to-year increase in traffic. How was this quantified? Listing 100,000 plus website visits and 27% year-to-year increase. That's how you quantify that information. That's how you show how your work increased the bottom line. Let's talk about when not to use your preferred name. If you're not sure about the employer's trans friendliness and you are early in transition and feel you won't pass, you may not want to use your preferred name because that could out you. Using your new name could out you. Using your old name might be safer. Remember, when you are offered a job, generally you have a probation period of anywhere from 60 to 90 days. Once you've passed that probation period, now you have more protection in the workplace. That might be the time that you decide to showcase your preferred name or start your transition in the workplace. Now let's talk about legal names. So legal names are used for background checks, social security documents, and insurance forms. If you have legally changed your name, then use your new legal name for all these purposes. HR managers are required to maintain confidentiality, but unfortunately, there is always some risk of disclosure. If your old name or your dead name is shared in the company, you can think about what you can do to remedy that. It could be going to the HR director, or it could be connecting with Equality California or HRC to get some help. So when designing your resume, keep it concise. Limit your resume to 1 to 2 pages, especially if you're just starting your work history. You really want to limit that to 1 page. Let's talk about references. So before you start interviewing, call your references. Let them know that you are applying for jobs and you would like to use your correct name and pronoun. Talk to the employer. Explain that past employers may not know about your new name and or pronoun. In order to maintain your privacy, you would like them to use the name and pronoun that you provide. If your former employer is transphobic or knows you by a different name, don't give the employer the permission to call them. But again, you want to have something prepared because you don't want them to go towards the negative in terms of why you don't want them to call your past employer. Explain. When I was with my past employer, I was using a different name and I would like to keep that information confidential, period. Short and sweet. Don't overshare, don't over-explain, don't get into the weeds of why things are happening. Short and sweet. So, extra stuff. Add some color to your resume with a short catch-all additional experience section at the end. Include clubs, organizations, volunteer experience, awards you've won, and even interesting hobbies. So let's look at our example. If you look at our example here under extra additional experience, they have, for example, recipient of Springfield University Hispanic Marketing Society's Rising Star Award, volunteer Springfield Animal Shelter, avid cyclist, and jazz piano player. You never know how this information will connect with the recruiter or hiring manager. They might be a devout cyclist, and seeing that you're a cyclist, they just got their Peloton, they're ready to cycle, they're very excited about it. That could be the information that gets you the job, that connects you to them. So especially if you're early in your work experience, you might want to add an additional experiences section. Now, let's talk about developing new references before we end here. So if coming out to your references or employer is not an option, you may need new references. This is great if you are switching careers or you haven't worked in some time. So think about those volunteering opportunities that you have around you, internships, even classes that you've taken. Those become potential references for you. People who can talk about your skills, your ability, how you're able to handle the work that you are given. You can also have a friend call your references, pretending to be the employer, just to see how your references are doing in regards to using your preferred name and pronoun. So let's talk about posting your resume before we end here. So now that you've developed an impactful resume, you want to start sharing it everywhere. So the kind of industry standard is LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great way to look at the company that you want to apply for, who's working there. You can message people and get a sense of the culture there. There's a lot of recruiters on LinkedIn who may look at your profile. You can also think about Glassdoor. Glassdoor really gives you an insight look into that company and the culture of that company. And you can also post jobs there and apply for jobs through Glassdoor. And there's also Craigslist. But with Craigslist, you want to be careful because there can be some scams that happen on Craigslist. Also think about your network. Your network, the people around you, are your net worth. Your friends, talk to people about the job you want to do, the careers that you're going for. Speak to your mentor, speak to your guide, share that information with everyone. You never know where that information can lead to an opportunity. Speak to professional people on LinkedIn or Glassdoor, and also utilize employment agencies. Here in California, we have work source centers. Other states have Job Centers of America. Those are places that are there to help you get a job, get connected to employers. So make sure you look for those resources as well. And you can also do a lot of this work online. So again, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on other professional social networking platforms, you can connect with people and just let them know, hey, I'm really interested in your company. I think you do great work. I've been looking at the different positions. Can you give me any advice? That's a great way of connecting with people who can lead you to opportunities. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is really a wonderful thing for Quality California to do. And we hope that you got a lot of good information out of this. And now I'm really excited to see Heather Tinsley's presentation. You're about to get some really good information. So thank you so much, Valerie.
Drían, thank you so much. That was really amazing. As you can see on the bottom of the screen, her contact information is there. And again, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. We'll be asking questions after Heather Tinsley-Fix's presentation, which is starting now. Heather, if you'd like to share your screen, and
Sure.
We'll pivot to you. Thank you.
Okay, let me do that. Tell me if you guys can see my screen.
There we go. Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, first of all, I want to echo Drían's thanks. I thank you so much for asking me to be here. I'm going to try and follow that up because that was a really amazing presentation. Really, really good information. I learned so much actually just from that quick 15 minutes. So thank you so much, Drían, for all that good info. I'm going to talk a little bit about the age proofing side of things because that's the kind of the work that I lead at AARP, where I engage with employers on the value of a multi-generational workforce and the value of age diversity. So, but also on the other side, other colleagues on the wider team that I'm on are offering all kinds of resources and tools to help the 50+ thrive in the workforce. So I'm going to just sort of quickly go over a couple of slides, and the meat of my presentation will be the tips part. But I'm going to talk a little bit for any of the older workers that are tuning in, some good news about the value of older workers. So in 2015, AARP published a business case for workers aged 50 plus and found that there was a strong business case for hiring older workers specifically. A couple of points. Older workers have lower rates of unexpected turnover, so it's more expected as opposed to unexpected. There are higher levels of motivation and engagement in older workers. Also, the output and productivity of older workers does not decline as they age. I mean, not universally across the board. Age does not contribute to a decline in productivity. In fact, it's called the Cogito study, but in 2010, this study compared the performance of workers in a whole range of age groups, and they found that the 65 to 80-year-olds performed just as well as the 20 to 31-year-olds. And part of the reason that this was that their output was varied, less errors, so it was more consistent, and they were more motivated to finish their tasks. So that's something that I find really interesting and encouraging as well about one's aging brain, is that as long as you keep your brain healthy, the types of things that you're able to do well shifts. So when you're younger, your brain is much faster in terms of processing information and recalling information. This won't be surprising to you guys, right? But as you age, you have all sorts of different types of intelligence that begin to peak, including judgment, vocabulary, empathy, things like that. And the type of intelligence that they call crystallized is kind of what I'm referring to here, which is that you're able to use learned strategies from the past to solve new problems. So you don't have to go as fast because you're not making as many mistakes. Another great thing about age diversity just in our workplaces in general is that age diversity improves performance at the team level, which is really fascinating. And the idea that I have on this, I think my theory is that there can be, in a good team where there's safety, psychological safety, and inclusive behavior, the knowledge spills over from person to person. And so when you have a good mix of ages, you're going to be able to glean the knowledge from all of those different perspectives and ages. So currently, there are 5 generations in the workforce, which is another reason why it's good to have a mix of ages in your own workforce. So 20 so years ago, there were really only 3, right? Because people retired earlier and because the population wasn't as age diverse. But now we've got 5 working side by side, and that's really good news for organizations that want to leverage that. But there is some bad news, which is that age discrimination does persist. So AARP did some research 2 years ago on the experiences of workers with age discrimination, and they found that 61% of workers 45 and over have either seen it at work or experienced it themselves. And again, unfortunately, when you slice the data in different ways, you find that intersectionality of diversity, those individuals experience it at higher rates. So LGBTQ workers, 71% of them have seen or experienced age discrimination at work. And this holds true for African Americans, for Latinx, for women. So even though as a whole, 61% of all workers, which is still too high in AARP's opinion, have experienced it or seen it, when you slice it, the white males have not seen it or experienced it as much. I think their number is like 55. So, So I want to talk a little bit right now about the new skill landscape, because it's going to feed into talking about some of the things about resume tips. So the 20th annual CEO survey by PricewaterhouseCoopers, the annual survey, they always ask CEOs, what are your top threats? And over the last number of years, availability of skills continues to rise as what jumped from number 5 to number 3 from 2018 to 2019. And you can see here that the area of skills that are the most needed and the hardest to find are the soft skills that Drían was referencing. So problem solving, leadership, ability to adapt, innovation, creativity, emotional intelligence. And these are skills that usually take time to develop, and you develop them in community and you develop them on the job. And so older workers tend to have more of these skills. I'm not going to go over these too quickly because we're going to send you this deck, but this was fascinating to me. So this was a study from that you can find it here. Heather McGowan is a really amazing thinker, and she studied a bunch of sources on the types of tasks that are rising in importance and the types of skills, and the types of skills that are lowering in importance. And what's interesting is that both math, which is really kind of a proxy for technical skills, math and social skills are high. But for example, a task that is high in technical skills but low in social skills is going down. So I'll give you an example. So this is a study from McKinsey on the work activities of more than 800 jobs across the US. And they assessed them to see what percentage of the job tasks in that occupation could be subject to automation, which kind of goes back to the previous slide. Anything that's repeatable, that is easy to program into like a yes/no type of activity is at risk for automation. So as a result, the demand for these human skills is increasing. And I hear this from employers all the time, that they're really having a hard time finding the soft skills they need. So those are that's just a quick sort of overview of what I wanted to talk about with when I come to the resume part, because it's so important to be able to emphasize these skills, not only in your resume, but in interviews. Okay, so moving on to age-proofing your resume. So a couple of just basic tips. A lot of these are going to mirror what Drían said, but one of the things that we always emphasize at AARP is to remove the dates of graduation. Do this on LinkedIn as well, on your resume. And it is frustrating for us to have to say this because we're out there talking to employers all the time about the value of that experience. But it's to help you get through applicant tracking systems, which, as you know, are analyzing your resume for keywords and for patterns of data, and making decisions on the fitness of you as a candidate. And so sometimes, unfortunately, those machines are learning from the preferences of the companies that are hiring, and they'll reject older candidates just simply because they're older. So that's a good thing to do, to remove the dates of graduation. But you do need to keep them next to the job history that you're including. So that's important because you want to provide that context. At the top of the resume, you want to have kind of your mission statement. It used to be called mission statement or objective, but now I've heard from recruiters, they're like, think of it as a commercial for yourself, right? So you want it to be, you want it to mirror what's on LinkedIn as well. You can have like a description on LinkedIn, and you should be very close. It should be like a really condensed summary of like your elevator speech, right? What you do well, what your history is, a leader bringing such and such years of experience in blah, blah, blah. Keep the length of your resume to no more than 2 pages. This is especially important for older candidates because they might have quite a lot of experience, and you don't want to cram it all on by shrinking the font, and you don't want to have like a 2, 3, or 4 page resume. The average recruiter spends 7 seconds reading a resume, right? And so Drían's tip about having white space that the eye can travel through and sort of easily pick out the parts that they want to focus on is so important. I know that there might be questions around, should I use chronological? Should I use functional? Should I, have pictures in it or whatever? And I think that the most important thing is to think about how a recruiter is going to be able to read it fast and get to the most relevant information fast. So on that score, you want to limit your job experience to the last 10 to 15 years if you're going to go chronological, or limit your job experience to what's relevant to the job you're applying for. So one of the things I often tell older job seekers is, if you have a skill like, I'm trying to think of an outdated coding language like Cobalt or something like that, and you're specifically applying for a job that needs that skill, then even if it was like 20 years ago, you're going to want to list it. Okay, a couple more tips. As Drían mentioned, you need to make sure that you have keywords and phrases from the job description in your resume. It's exhausting because it kind of means you sort of have to tweak your resume every time you apply for a job, but again, it's to get you past that electronic gatekeeper. Another good thing to do, and I know Valerie was talking about, we were chatting about this before we opened up, but study examples of resumes either that work well in your industry or your specific profession. So here's where you can leverage your network. And you can probably also just, you know, search on resume banks or through, look at people's LinkedIn profiles. But it really does help to get an example of like what people who, the kind of people they're looking for, what their resume looks like, essentially. Clean font, layout, like we were talking about, a lot of white space is good. Include the measurable outcomes, just like Drían said. You want to have, anywhere you can, you want to have that data. And you want to list achievements rather than just job duties. Like responsible for weekly reporting is a job duty, whereas, you know, overhaul the reporting process is an achievement. Again, the bottom line is you really need to make it easy for employers to see quickly why you're an ideal candidate for the job. A couple of other points to mention. Again, if you have technical skills, emphasize them. If you have human skills, emphasize them. So important to emphasize those things. One of the digital, like basic digital skills I often tell older workers to pick up on is collaboration software. So that's things like Microsoft Teams or Slack. Zoom now is changing the way we do work, obviously, in this post-COVID future. And so basic digital literacy is so important, and you need to emphasize it if you've got it. Another thing, leverage social media, right? So polish your LinkedIn profile. You're going to want to use, by the way, the same name. Well, actually, Drían, I would love to have your opinion on this, actually. We usually tell people use the same name and picture across all of your profiles. I would say that's probably holds true for current, right? So, because what you don't want is to have people look for you and have different, like is this person really who they said they are, or whatever? Or you don't want like Samantha J. Thompson instead of Samantha Thompson. So you want to be consistent. And you also, another good way to actually connect and grow your profile, your network, I'm sorry, is to join groups on Twitter or to talk to people via Twitter and on LinkedIn and Facebook as well. So if you join the conversation that's going on these platforms, it not only helps increase your network, but it also gives you an education at the same time, right? So you're staying abreast of trends, you're understanding like what the hot topics are. Also, you should always Google yourself. And again, when I stop, Drían, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this because they will do it. Employers will Google you. So you're going to want to make sure that your sort of digital footprint looks good and looks the way you want it to look. And lastly, as we were talking, as Drían was saying, definitely network. You definitely need to get your resume out to everyone. So that, just like she was saying, inventory the full breadth of your experience. Like I remember one time I was picking up my son at school and I was just chatting with a fellow mom. I didn't know her that well. And I just talked about what I did. She talked about what she does. And I was like, you know, I'm really interested in that. How do you, how can you get me connected? And so that's the way to do it. But anywhere that you interact with people, it's a potential source for networking. Anywhere that you interact with people in a substantive way. A couple resources I wanted to mention from AARP. We have two that I wanted to highlight. The first is our job board. So if you go to aarp.org/jobs, you can see the jobs that are available in your area. Most of the employers that post jobs on this job board are looking for 50+ people because they value that cohort as part of the mix of the people they recruit. We also have a resume advisor. So if you go to aarp.org/resume, you can see that. You can get a free expert review of your resume. And then if you want, you can purchase discounted packages for a rewriting of it. They can also rewrite your LinkedIn profile for you and so on. And you get a discount just for being on the website. And you get an additional discount if you're a member. So that's everything I had. I would love to I'd love to like have a discussion now maybe and see, Valerie, if we have any questions. And also I'd love to hear, Drían, your perspective on that consistency of name and the Googling.
Heather, that was amazing. And really, I thank both of you so much. These are really powerful presentations. You offered a lot of resources and also really practical advice. on how to anticipate discrimination and how to respond to it in real time. So that's really incredibly helpful for our audience. Drían, if you want to answer those questions that Heather posted, and if you are going to pose to you, and then if you have any questions to Heather, I'm starting to monitor the questions that are coming in the Q&A box. And again, it's at the bottom of the screen. Feel free just to type them in, then all the panelists will see them, and then we can take them from there. Thank you.
Wonderful. And that's a great question, Heather. And I think that for trans people, it can get a little complicated. You know, I think the consideration is where you are in your transition, especially if you're early in transition, you may, and you've developed a lot of social media for yourself, then you may have a history in an old name that no longer fits you, and you're trying to develop your new sort of visibility. And so, you know, that's going to be sort of an odd period where you're transitioning all your information from one identity to the other. And so that, you know, will make it more difficult to have a consistent name throughout. I think you know, it might be a process of just slowly eliminating anything that refers to your dead name and starting to replace it with your current information. But that being said, you know, that really relates to your question about Googling. You know, I think everyone definitely should Google themselves. I think nowadays it's the standard. Everyone will Google everyone. I went to a mechanic a while ago to get some tires replaced. And when I came back, he had Googled me and started asking me about my work and what was working with trans people. And I was like, how do you know this? And he was like, oh, I Googled you. So you should just expect that everybody Googles you. So look at your work history, look at the information that comes up. And, you know, especially credit card companies keep a very long history of your identity. And so that's how employers are able to find out your old name, your dead name. And so you should be prepared for that. Some people in the community think that once you've gotten your court-ordered name and gender change, that's it. No one will ever know about your old name. Unfortunately, that's not true. And so for trans people, it's about, you know, being prepared to talk about a dead name that comes up, or an old sort of post that you made in an old identity. And so just being prepared to talk about those things is really important for trans people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Thank you.
So as you can see, I just put in the chat box some common resume mistakes. Some of them seem really obvious, like spelling mistakes or using a lot of weird fonts and, you know, funky colors, maybe forgetting to update your contact information. Those seem really obvious. But other ones that aren't that easy to navigate maybe are like gaps in work history. How would both of you recommend that people deal with maybe a spotty work history or the lack of linear jobs in the same field?
Heather, you want to take the first one?
Sure. So we get this question a lot because we know that people like to, a lot of times people retire and then they're 6 months later, they're crawling the walls. They're like, I'm so bored. I want to get back into the work I do that I love. Or you might have been laid off, and we know that that's the sort of the norm right now, that, you know, millions and millions of people are in this situation. The good news is that I think for COVID unemployment, you're pretty much covered. No one's going to question why that happened, right? If you want to not hide, but if you want to sort of, you know, streamline your work history and not necessarily reference that, or you want to streamline a spotty work history, the best thing to do is choose more of a functional resume version than a chronological. Don't do chronological. So you're going to want to list, you're going to clump those job types together and those skill types together and put, you know, you can first list the skills and the achievements, and then you can underneath just bullet the jobs where you have had those and the dates. So that's one way to do it. If it comes up in an interview, I always think the best thing to do is to be honest about the situation, but also frame it in a positive way. So for example, if you had to leave to take care of an older person, you know, you can say, listen, my mom really needed me, and I decided to step out for a bit, and I learned all kinds of skills during that period. Navigating health insurance, you know, was a whole job in and of itself. So frame it positively, because I don't think it's good to try and cover it up. You might also just say, you know, I just decided to take a break and lean out and sort of, you know, reset. You don't have to, like Drían said, you don't have to go into any more information than that, but you should address it.
And you know, I would say for trans people, oftentimes, because, you know, our unemployment rates and underemployment rates are so high, You know, oftentimes we will have to do things like the street economy in order to survive. And so, you know, if you have gaps in your work history because you were involved in the street economy as a way of surviving, then, you know, you want to frame that in a different way. You can say you were self-employed, that you were doing some sort of service, whether it's a massage service or, you know, mentoring. Those are the ways that you can describe some of that work. And again, you know, I think, Heather, what you mentioned was really important, that even if you've taken a break to take care of a loved one, or for example, if you were doing sex work, there are a lot of skills that you develop there. When you're doing sex work, you're navigating situations, you're identifying personalities, you're problem solving. You have a lot of really incredible skills that you've developed doing that work. And so those are things that you can highlight in those gaps.
That's really helpful. So one thing that Heather talked a little bit about was the applicant tracking applications. Basically, this is sort of computer generated ways that that employers sort of sift out who is a good fit for their jobs. And we have a question from Lauren in the Q&A box. Many prospective employers use online applications to make it difficult not to include previous names, dates of employment, etc. This is especially true of public employers. So like government ones. So I think the question is mostly focused on to Drían, how to navigate the inherent bias of these applications, and maybe also with regard to age discrimination. Heather, maybe you could mention that.
You know, when more and more HR departments are using those systems to really sort of look at your resume first. And so the things that you can do to make sure that your resume gets to a person is, you know, the tips that Heather mentioned earlier about no mistakes, no spelling errors, but also, you know, I think it's really, really important. I'm just going to reiterate that you take the phrases that are in that job description and use them as much as possible in your resume. You want those things to relate. That will help move you to the top of that list. Sometimes systems are just difficult to navigate. And sometimes it's about that sort of discussion that you can have with a recruiter. And sometimes, you know, applications that are online will have a space for you to put any other names used, and that's where you can put your preferred identity information. But sometimes the systems don't have that. And so that's why, you know, you should be applying to a variety of jobs. Don't put all your eggs in one basket and think that this one job will be it. You should have others ready to go. Some systems will be easier to navigate than others. And unfortunately, that's just the landscape currently.
Yeah, Drían's totally right. And I think we tell people that sometimes it's possible if they're asking for date of birth or date of graduation that you just put 9999 for the year. But it's so interesting that you mentioned a lot of times public employers are going to have, because they tend to have legacy systems and older systems, and that are very like linear, you know, like what, you know, geared towards resumes 20 years ago. So that really can certainly be difficult. I think if you're applying for those jobs, like Drían mentioned, don't put all your eggs in one basket and fill out the forms truthfully. But networking is also a good way to get around that. So like I've applied for jobs on USA.gov a couple of times. And even when the person who was hiring, not the person who was hiring, but someone connected to the person who was hiring, reached out and said, you should apply for this job. And I'm going to tell this person about you. I still didn't get through. So I don't know what to tell you about public employers. They're really tough, but networking can also be a good way to get around that.
Excellent. We have a question from an anonymous attendee. It says, a lot of my work is very LGBTQ+, and I'm not always sure how potential employers might feel about LGBTQ+ people and issues. How do you recommend that I frame this work in my resume?
You know, for me, again, when you start this journey of, you know, applying with the company, research. You want to look on, you know, HRC's Corporate Equality Index. Are they listed in there? Do they have a rating? If they don't, look on Glassdoor, see if people are talking about what the culture is within that company. You can look up the company on LinkedIn, see who's working there. And if you see somebody who's friendly or who you connect with, you can send them a message and say, hey, I had a question about the company. Can you tell me about their diversity and inclusion work, or how diverse an environment you think that is? And then that will really give you some hints about what you want to highlight about your LGBTQ work, or what you don't want to highlight about it. You know, and if they're not an inclusive employer, that might not be the right place for you. You could find a better place that will really see all of your LGBTQ work as a benefit to them.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent answer. We have a question from Chris Barber, who's thanking us for this seminar. And he says that I see that Drían has shared her Instagram account. Should we share social media accounts only if they're related to our professions, or in a non-professional account that's part of today's picture of who you are?
That is a really good question, and I would say you should only share professional accounts. That's my personal opinion on that, because they're going to, like we were talking about, they're going to Google you anyway. And I think that in terms of putting additional experience at the end where you list things that might be more of your personal flavor, I think that's the appropriate place to do it. I think it's so good to talk about it in an interview, but I think sending someone your personal Facebook or Instagram account, I would not do it personally. But Drían, you might have a different opinion.
No, I would agree. If you have a personal or professional Instagram, let's say you do floral design and you take lots of pictures of the flowers that you've done, clients that are happy, then that you can share. But if you're, you know, especially with everything that's going on, if you're sharing a lot of political information, you know, things like that, that might not work to your benefit. So if it is an Instagram account, make sure that it is a professional one, not your personal one. But, you know, most likely if somebody Googles you, they're going to see both come up. And so you should be prepared for that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So many resume experts advise people to use action words rather than the passive voice. What do you think about the use of action words versus well, words that are passive?
Absolutely. You know, it's like what Heather was saying. This is, you know, your commercial. This is your elevator speech, if you will. And so you want to present yourself as somebody who is motivated, who has energy, who completes projects. And so you want to use action words that describe you in that way.
Yeah, and I love that when Drían first talked about, she set this in the context of doing what you love. And I think that even if that's not a whole job, you can talk about the like 2 or 3 skills that I'm thinking elevator speech, the 2 or 3 things that you just know you do really well, because the things that you know you do well, you will be so much more confident when you talk about them. Mm-hmm. So you're not gonna, like, if I went in there and I was like, because everybody does this, you know, I have, you know, 6 of the 10 skills, you know, and they might ask me about the skills I don't have, and I'll talk about it, but I'm less confident, less fluid, and less able to come up with things off the top of my head. Whereas the stuff that I know that I do well, it just comes flowing right out of me. And to me, that's sort of akin to the action verbs. You want to paint the most persuasive picture possible.
Mm-hmm. In the chat box, we have another question from Lauren. What do you think about sending a resume by mail? Obviously, we've had most of the discussion now is online and computer generated. She says that often the listings will say no calls allowed, but she's never seen one that says no mail. So what do you think about following up with a cover letter and an application through the mail?
I mean, I don't know that I would mail it, because even if you do, they're going to probably ask you to go through their systems anyway. The exception to this would be a really small organization, right, where you're already networked in, or you know people, or like a local small company. Then that might be a way to sort of distinguish yourself. But I would say to send thank you notes. So if you have an interview, you should definitely send a thank you note by mail.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking along the same lines that, yes, for a thank you letter where you want to send a personalized card, something that they open, that's a great time to mail something. But mailing resumes and cover letters is kind of antiquated, not really done. And Heather's exactly right that they're just going to tell you, okay, but you still have to log online and put in your resume and all of that. So you should definitely start with that.
Mm-hmm. I don't really see a lot of other questions in the chat box. If there's anything that either of you would like to add, maybe something that we haven't covered, any thoughts you might have. As I said, all of these webinars are going to be recorded. You can follow up with either of our two panelists. We'll be having a number of these webinars over time between now and November. So obviously we'll always be focused on these things and providing resources on our website and through these webinars. But if either one of you have any further thoughts or possibly questions for each other.
I have a question for you, Drían. You sparked something in me when you talked about credit history. Mm-hmm. And I was really, because I know that so many decisions are now being outsourced to algorithms, including in the hiring space, which is disturbing to anyone who has concerns about discrimination, right? For lots of reasons. But there's also decisions being made about lending, your ability to get a loan, your ability to get into housing, your ability to get into school. I'm just curious if you've come across any of that embedding of discrimination against LGBTQ people through this sort of algorithmic decision land.
I think the most that we've seen with clients is navigating those systems that are really set up for, cisgender binary identities. So don't take into account, a preferred name, don't take into account pronouns. And so, that's really what I see coming up with our clients is navigating those systems where they don't feel there's a space for them to be able to talk about their identity in an authentic way. Mm-hmm. And I think the major barrier with those algorithms is definitely when you're talking about pre and post history, and especially credit history. Especially if you're building up your new credit in your new identity, that could erase your old credit history, which then makes it harder for you to get those loans. And so it really, oftentimes is about where you are with your identity documents and whether you've gone through the full court-ordered name and gender change, or, what's less used now are common law name changes. But, if somebody did have a common law name change, meaning they just changed their state ID, that could complicate accessing Social Security, accessing credit history. So identity documents definitely play a role in that.
Right. Thanks. That's really interesting.
And I would also say that people who have, spent time in incarceration would also encounter some of these problems. I don't know if either of you have any thoughts about how to address that in a resume or interview process.
Yeah, I think so. SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, has a pledge that companies can take right now that I'm trying to remember what the name of this pledge is. But anyway, it's specifically focused on rehiring.
Huh? Is that the ban the box one?
No, although it's related to that work. But yeah, I would definitely, like Drían says, do research on companies to make sure that they're, inclusive of those types of candidates and talk about it honestly in the interview. But again, always trying to frame things in a positive light and emphasize the things that you learned during whatever that was, unemployment or incarceration or street work or whatever, that because all experiences, if we learn from them, are going to just build up our skill set. And I think, again, those soft skills are the ones we learn through those types of experiences. So I just think that it's a tough question, but and when the labor market returns, I don't know how long that'll take, because it was the lowest rate of unemployment in like 50 years. When that happens, employers are much more open to non-traditional candidates. But when the economy does come back and the unemployment rate starts to go down, I think there will be more, again, an additional openness to non-traditional candidates. And so, organizations like Equality California and AARP and Drían's organization are working all the time to try and prise those systems open and help equal the playing field.
I would say that, unfortunately, lots of trans people have to deal with the criminal justice system because we're forced to do things we don't want to do to survive. And so, there are a lot of really good organizations that work with reentry populations that have job leads that are specific to people who've experienced incarceration, who have relationships with employers who understand the community, the population, and open up their positions to that population. So there are also organizations specifically working with reentry individuals, and so people should definitely connect with those organizations as well. It's a great resource to have.
Mm-hmm. Drían, thanks so much for flagging that. And we will be sending out information for people who have experienced reentry and other challenges. Well, perhaps with that, I don't see other questions that have come into the chat box. I wanted to thank both of you immensely for your time, for your expertise, for your knowledge, for your really for your respectful and loving approaches and helping us sort of figure out how to navigate these incredibly challenging times. And to anticipate possibly discriminatory employers or recruiters and how to sidestep challenges and extra barriers that come our way. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much, Heather Tinsley-Fix and Drían Juarez. You've both been amazing. We appreciate you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Quality California.
Thank you all. Thank you, Drían. Bye.
Thank you for everyone who's joined us today. We appreciate it so much.
Oh, yes. Thank you for joining us.
Yes. Take care, everyone.
Bye, all.
Bye.